Welcome to Bear Creek Nature Center. I guess thanks to the Nature Centers for hosting us. The bathrooms are down this side hallway over here. If you end up needing them, please finish the snacks before you leave. If we are not acquainted with each other, I'm Jessica. I'm the president, apparently. We'll see how this goes, because as some of you may know, like, I'm never at these meetings. I really don't know how they go, but I'm in town this month. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen again for y'all online. Can y'all hear me online? Can somebody like give a thumbs up or some kind of indication?
I can hear you.
You, Melanie, look at that. We know Melanie. Okay. Do some announcements, maybe. Okay. I see my cursor thinking really hard. Oh, okay. So like I said, my name is Jessica. Heather is our vice president. I don't see her here tonight, but any day that you might pop into Wild Birds Unlimited, you might find her. Secretary Jason Rademacher, I don't see him here tonight either. Treasurer Jim Hickey, not here. Our CBC Christmas Bird Count Coordinator Tyler. Conservation Chair Linda. Field trip coordinator Melanie Helton. Hey, we know you're online. Education chair and hospitality coordinator Devin. Last call for getting your raffle tickets for the birdseed. Membership chair Michael Rogers, not here tonight, but woo. Programs chair Tally, she is stranded out in Falcon tonight under 8 inches of snow or something. But woo for Tally, because she is the one, she's our programs chair. She is the one that organizes all of these monthly meetings. So Jonathan, do you remember like how long ago Tally contacted you for this? Like eons ago? She is on it. And then our communications chair, Mary Rudolph, or Wilson, Mary Wilson. Now that I've introduced you to everybody, guess what? 3 of those positions are opening up. If you feel so inspired and you want to dedicate a little bit of your time to helping Aiken do everything that we do, you can email me, president@AikenAudubon.com, and we will tell you a little bit more about those things. I did get to edit that word 3 to the letter, or the word 3 from the word 4 earlier, because Tally's position, the programs chair, Tally is eventually going to give up this position. And just like she plans y'all a year out, she's planning giving up this position a long time out. But we do have a new programs chair that will slowly be taking the reins, Paula Weggert. So that's really exciting. Good to have you on board. Slowly, officially, unofficially. A few things coming up, field trips that are on the horizon, Clear Spring Ranch and Fountain Creek Regional Park. This is a DFO shared program with Megan Miller. So Megan Miller down in Pueblo. And if you've ever been at Clear Spring Ranch on those mornings where they're doing the bird banding, Megan has probably been one of those students doing the banding. She's a really, really good leader, but she is leading a co-trip for DFO and Aiken Audubon. The trick about it, because it's a DFO, you'll find the information on our website, but you would need to register through Denver field ornithologists. So it's slightly more official. April 20th, I've got a Birds and Brews going all the way down to Pueblo Reservoir and then Pueblo Brewing. It's like maybe half-ish full right now. There's a few of you in this room that I know are headed there with us. April 25th, Kelly Liddell. She lives kind of in the Woodman area of the Springs on the northwest side. She is just opening up her garden. It's a really nice area to bird, just kind of a sit, leisurely, nice spot. April 26th, Austin Bluffs open space with Colin Hildreth. I've been on one bird walk with him before, and he's another wealth of information, really cool guy. And then major announcement, you might have heard the Pikes Peak Birding and Nature Festival is in May. But the major announcement for tonight is that registration opens this Saturday. And so registration is going to be open for a full month, but it's kind of like somebody in the survey last year for the festival, they said that it's like buying Taylor Swift concert tickets. There are lots and lots of field trips, workshops, seminars available. Some of them are particularly popular. You might find that within 5 to 10 minutes of registration being open on Saturday, those trips are going to be full. But that's fine because all the birds have wings and they're going to fly from those popular places to the other places that are just as good. It's fine. So just know that registration opens on Saturday. Be checking out the website to prepare yourself. And then here is a volunteer opportunity. Aiken is going to be one of the booth spaces at the Fountain Creek Nature Center Family Fun Day. So it's an opportunity. It's like a 4-hour program down in Fountain where people just with their families are walking the nature trail and interacting with a dozen to 15 or so local STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, booths all around the nature trail. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife is one of those booths. Garden of the Gods is one. 719 Kindness Rocks. Aiken Canyon Preserve. Aiken Audubon Society is one of those booths, and they will be educating the potentially up to 800 guests about birds in our local habitats. So Devin is out there. She is spearheading that, and if you would like to help her, she will set you up. So either email us or talk to her, but we could use a lot more hands on deck to educate the 800 people. And then Tally is still doing birding by book. Their next meeting is May 5th. And so it is The Birds at My Table, Why We Feed Wild Birds and Why It Matters by Daryl Jones. So read it, get together, we'll discuss it. To my knowledge, she does not hand out grades based on how much you actually read. No pressure. Some rare bird report stuff. Let me know if I missed anything. Maybe something's popped up in the past few days, but Clark's Grebe out at Big Johnson Reservoir, and the Northern Shrike, there was one at Kettle Lakes. Those aren't necessarily rare, but it's just a seasonal flagging, kind of late for the shrike, kind of late. Is it late? Is it early for the grebe? Is it just passing through and it's cool? I don't know. The winter wren is still hanging out down in Fountain Creek Regional Park. That Mexican duck is in Pueblo still at Cattail Crossing. Did it ever leave? It's like a permanent fixture. Well, that's great news if you want to go chase that. Short-billed gull was in the Pueblo West gravel pit. Murray, that great black-backed gull, still at the marina at Lake Pueblo State Park. He's kind of a permanent winter fixture at least. That red-bellied woodpecker is still hanging out at Nature and Wildlife Discovery Center down in Pueblo. All the birds are down in Pueblo, apparently, by the way. And then raise your hand if you saw the crested caracara. Everyone made the pilgrimage? Is it still there? Yes. Oh. Okay, cool. I saw somebody said somewhere that like Monday, it was not seen. And it was very ominous, but I'm glad it's still hanging around. It's been there for at least a couple of weeks. And if you just kind of go to where all the lists are being posted and you sit there patiently, it will eventually hop up on a telephone pole and pose for you. Yeah, it's over there. Which is really precious whenever there's a rare bird and all of us really annoying birds come clog up the roadway with our car, but the locals are still friendly. I really appreciate that. Next month, the Aiken meeting is on the 16th and it is here again. So you made it here once. You've got practice. That'll be Ivan Phillipson, desert birds and their adaptations. But moving on to tonight, bringing back the Lesser Prairie-Chicken. Jonathan Reitz is a wildlife biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife in Lamar. He has been working on Lesser Prairie-Chicken conservation since 2006. Jonathan helps manage research and conserve a long list of big game, small game, and threatened endangered species in Southeast Colorado. So please welcome Jonathan. And give me a moment to switch us over.
Don't forget to record.
It is recording. Because I knew I'd forget. Oh, that's right. I ditched your. I think you're good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for having me. Again, my name is Jonathan Reitz. I'm a wildlife biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Really excited to be able to visit with you about, I'm sure, raise your hand if you have a favorite bird. Like, I'd imagine most people have a favorite bird. Some of you may be undecided. You're all wrong. This is the coolest bird. This is my favorite bird anyways, the Lesser Prairie-Chicken. So thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today about the Lesser Prairie-Chicken. I guess a little bit more about myself. I'll give you a second to absorb this slide. There's a lot of truth here. So this is kind of sad, but like I said, this is my life there. So yes, we get to do some cool things out there and go hands-on with wildlife. And I'm right on the cusp of the Lesser Prairie-Chicken survey season. So I'll be out every calm morning for about 2.5 months looking for lesser prairie chickens, counting lesser prairie chickens, and all that kind of stuff. But then I have to get back and do a full day of my regular job. So sometimes to do the fun stuff, you gotta, just do more of that. So anyways, I work with all sorts of species. I've worked and lived down in southeast Colorado for 20 years now. I'm actually originally from the Florissant area, and I fell in love with the prairie when I was fairly young. And one of those odd ducks that instead of going to the mountains, wanted to be out in God's country in the grasslands. And I don't regret it at all. It took a little while for my wife to come around to that, though. But she eventually got to appreciate the beauty that I see and experience every day. I work on a host of species, everything from bighorn sheep and elk and bears to prairie chickens, black-footed ferrets, black rails, a whole bunch of stuff. Anymore, lesser prairie chickens and black-footed ferrets kind of eat up most of my time. That, and then I do a lot of habitat work. That's my greatest passion, and I feel like where we make the greatest difference is through habitat. So let's talk about the star of the show today, the lesser prairie chicken. Just some basic information. As with most birds, the ones that are slightly more flashy or a lot more flashy, the male would be there on the right. You can see those black feathers extended. Those are called pinnae, and they, raise them when they're doing their displays, when they're excited. You can see the yellow eye combs during the breeding season.
It's fine.
Were they not seeing them online?
They could see your notes.
Oh, was there notes? All right, thank you. So yeah, you can see it's eye combs during the breeding season. The eye combs they extend them and they get larger just when they get excited, and then they have a red air sac. You'll see some pictures here in a minute. The females also have pinnae and an air sac and eye combs. They're just much smaller, not as obvious. And I have actually seen females. It's very rare, but I have seen females gobble, like make a sort of a booming sound. I've only seen that when I've seen quite a few females on a lek and they're fighting and they're working out their pecking order. They actually will inflate their air sacs as well. So there's 3 extant species of prairie chickens. Again, the focus tonight is the lesser prairie chicken. This map here shows the historic range in light green. So you can see that historically, quite a bit of the state of Texas, western Oklahoma, all of southwest Kansas, southeast Colorado, and eastern New Mexico, we're all in the range. In fact, Colorado's lesser chicken range extended all the way to Pueblo. So pretty close here to Colorado Springs. Maybe there were even birds up here by Colorado Springs. And then in the dark green, that's where we have lesser prairie chickens today. The Atwater prairie chicken, well, let me step back real quick. Currently, lesser prairie chickens are listed federally as a threatened species in the northern population. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service basically broke up the population into two distinct population segments. The northern population is listed as threatened. The southern population is listed as endangered. The Atwater prairie chicken are down on the Gulf Coast in Texas, and that's a sad story. I mean, it's not that far behind the heath hen, which is an extinct species of prairie grouse that was on the eastern seaboard. The only reason that the Atwater still exists to this day is through captive breeding programs. They do all sorts of crazy things like hens that are out there in the wild, of which there's only usually less than 200. Often there'll be less than like 60 or 70 birds in the wild. They're only found in 2 locations there in Texas. They'll go out, a nesting hen, they'll put a cage around that nesting hen, and they'll do bug sweeps and throw food in there to feed the hen, try to keep predators from destroying the nest. And then when the hen hatches the nest, they'll move that cage around every day with the hen and the brood in there, and they do bug sweeps to feed them. It's just a lot of desperate measures to keep this species alive. So I sure hope that we never experience that with the lesser chicken. And fortunately, the greater prairie chicken is doing much better. As you can see, the greater prairie chicken, they have the Atwater and lesser prairie chickens the Atwater and the greater prairie chickens look very similar. And their booming sound, that sounds almost exactly the same. Whereas the booming sound for the lesser prairie chicken is very different than the Atwater or greater. You can see that lesser prairie chicken has this red air sac that's smaller in size than the air sacs for graders and Atwaters. And the greater prairie chickens, generally the barring on them are dark. They are slightly larger than lesser prairie chickens. And often I've said, if I had a time machine before I'd see the dinosaurs, I think I'd go back and find whoever named lesser prairie chickens and greater prairie chickens and kick them in the shin, because there's nothing lesser about the lesser prairie chicken. So prairie chickens are lekking species, just as several other species of grouse. Lekking being basically they have a breeding site they come to year after year after year to display. Usually the males are there day after day. For lesser prairie chickens, they are there all the way from, they'll start showing up in February. Usually by the last week of March, all the males are on the lek and they're doing their display every morning, most evenings. And they'll do that all the way till about June 1st. Whereas the females will show up on the lek for a morning or 2 or 3 for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and that's it. They pick their dude and then they get out of there. So the males, they put a lot into trying to impress the females. Real quick, I'll see if we can get. So these are sounds of lesser prairie chickens. So these, going back up, the recordings of these chickens actually, it's kind of sad to me every time I hear this, because I took these recordings on the Comanche grasslands with our last active lek that was on the Comanche grasslands, in an area that no longer has birds. So those are sounds from the past. And unfortunately, most places that had lesser prairie chickens, that's the story. And over my career of 20 years so far, there's far more places where we've lost chickens than have found new chickens. This is going to be, I'll be talking about a lot of depressing stuff tonight. There's some silver linings, some stuff to get excited about, but the reality is this is how it is. Just going to give you basically Colorado's lesser chicken story, like what has happened, what we had historically, what's gotten us to where we are now, and the things that we're trying to do to try to keep this species around. So where are lesser prairie chickens found nowadays? Again, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas, the 5 states that they're found in. Back in 2013, 2014, a big prairie chicken document was put together by the 5 states called the Lesser Prairie-Chicken Range-Wide Plan. In that document, they broke up the range into 4 distinct ecoregions that are named after their primary habitat type. That's not the only habitat type that's found in that area. But here in Colorado, the majority of our lesser prairie chicken range is in the purple there. That's the sand sagebrush ecoregion. In the green is the shortgrass CRP ecoregion, which is, kind of west central Kansas. And then you can see in south central Kansas, across the Oklahoma Panhandle, down to the northeast part of the Texas Panhandle, the mixed grass prairie ecoregion, and then clear down here on the New Mexico-Texas border is the sand shinnery ecoregion. Tonight, we'll mostly be talking about the sand sagebrush ecoregion and the story for the birds there. So just to give kind of a better kind of visual of what this habitat looks like in each of these ecoregions, or the habitats that you find lesser prairie chickens in. Historically, much of where we'd find lesser prairie chickens in Colorado is sand sage rangeland. Pre-European settlement, they were found in a lot of shortgrass habitat too, where our shortgrass was more heterogeneous. There was a lot more species of grass there, taller grass. So they covered a much broader area. But for decades and decades and decades in Colorado, sand sage has been the game. CRP grasslands. This is kind of a relatively new development for prairie chickens. When I say relatively, it's been over the last 30 years or so. Basically, CRP is farm ground enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program. It's a U.S. Department of Agriculture program that's administered through the Farm Bill. And basically, farmers are paid to retire for a period of time to set aside farm ground. And this is done for a few different reasons. One is to help slow down or prevent soil erosion. There are some lessons learned from the dirty 30s and the Dust Bowl. Also, wildlife is a component of this. And then it's a way of kind of setting aside farm ground for the future, where we're not, taking nutrients out of a system. The nutrients are building in a system that's kind of like grass bank that can be there for future generations. And we'll talk more about this later, but CRP, they first started putting CRP on the ground in the mid 80s. After about 8 or 10 years of CRP being out there, lesser prairie chickens started moving into CRP in some areas. They became kind of adapted to it. Currently in Colorado, all of our leks are found in CRP, actually. We've lost all of our leks in our rangeland, so we're highly dependent on this type of habitat. Then you have, the shortgrass CRP ecoregion I listed before. The shortgrass habitat is, when you think of shortgrass habitat, a lot of you think of like the buffalo grass blue grama that you're going to see just east of town here. Historically, even just east of town, we would have had a lot more, sand dropseed and even little blue stem, some other species out there. As you go further east and they get a little bit more precipitation, like in Kansas, a lot of their shortgrass is the same species of grasses, but they actually consistently have much taller cover, enough so much that lesser prairie chickens can actually live out there. Mixed grass rangeland. This is in my opinion, some of the prettiest stuff that we have in our country, down like the Red Hills of Kansas, south central Kansas is where I took this picture. Little blue stem, yellow Indian, side oats, grama, going to be some of your dominant species in this system. And then the shinnery oak rangeland, where sand shinnery and then bunch grasses kind of are the predominant species that those chickens are living in there. So there's a lot to this slide, but just wanted to kind of to understand where we are now and give perspective. It's important to see where we've come from. I forgot to bring a book tonight, and I wish I had, but I was going to read some accounts out of there from 1914. But Colorado used to have a ton of lesser prairie chickens. Right on the Kansas-Colorado border, in those accounts from 1914, it identifies, it talks about some areas where in one Kaffir cornfield, which is like a precursor to Milo, they observed, this birder observed, 3,000 to 5,000 prairie chickens in one Kaffir cornfield. His brother the next year, and this is basically on the Baca County, Stevens County line, and then Stevens County is an extreme southwest county in Kansas. Baca County is the farthest extreme county in southeast Colorado. So right around that area, 3,000 to 5,000 seen in one field. His brother the next year saw estimated 10 to 14,000 lesser prairie chickens in one field. To put that into perspective, The estimated population in total right now is around 35,000 birds spread across all 5 states. The first kind of shot across the bow hurting lesser prairie chickens was market hunting, where it was a wholesale, just giant sale of our wildlife going to eastern markets where deer, antelope, prairie chickens, bison robes were all loaded on train cars and headed out east. And here in Colorado Springs, in Pueblo, tens of thousands of prairie chickens were loaded up into train cars and headed east. Then basically at the same time, in 1863, you had the Homesteading Act, where now you had a lot of European settlers coming out and breaking out the landscape. They brought domestic livestock with them, and you went from a system of historically bison that would come through, they would graze an area and blitz it off, but then they might not return for 5 or 8 or 10 or 12 years. And so you'd have prairie fires, but then you wouldn't have fires for years and years. And the prairie chickens were adapted to heterogeneity on that kind of scale, where there was enough habitat around, they could shift around. But now you came and basically all the grasslands were getting grazed year round by domestic livestock. So areas that we historically had prairie chickens in, like our shortgrass prairie, it didn't take but hardly any grazing, because we're on the western part of the range where the grass is, we don't have a lot of rain to grow grass. And so it didn't take much in the way of grazing, where we lost chickens across our shortgrass habitat. And then also then came the plow, right, where the vast majority of our lesser prairie chicken habitat was converted to farm ground. And that all culminated then with the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, where we had a severe drought. And what didn't, wasn't blowing had sand blown on top of it. So like everything was impacted, even your rangeland that wasn't broken out. The Dust Bowl was, had such a great impact on lesser prairie chickens that in Colorado, they were extirpated. We lost all our lesser prairie chickens in Colorado, and in Southwest Kansas, they were on the brink. They thought that they were lost, but they were not, but there was just small remnant population in the sand sage country. Sand sagebrush was the one place, though, that they could find sanctuary, because a lot of that sand sagebrush couldn't be farmed because it was too sandy. And so the birds were able to kind of find a refugia in those areas. And so the sand sage really played an important part. And that's actually then what held our chickens all the way until CRP hit the scene and we started seeing prairie chickens expand out of the sand sage. So in the sand sage ecoregion, again, that's the area just right on the Kansas-Colorado border, goes all the way from Garden City, Kansas to the Lamar area. They recovered actually really well. They were extirpated in the state, but in 1952, they were clearly documented being back in the state. We started actually doing surveys back in the 50s. And we started in 1972. We've done annual surveys every year since 1972. The birds came back to the point that actually in the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, there was an estimated 80,000 lesser prairie chickens in the sand sage ecoregion. So they really made a pretty strong recovery. Now, that is nowhere near what there would have been historically, but still 80,000 prairie chickens in the sand sage, you're doing pretty good. Unfortunately, then in a lot of the sand sage, especially the eastern part of the sand sage ecoregion, we had a lot more conversion. Most of the sand sage was spared because you couldn't farm it. It was too sandy. But as soon as they started, center pivot irrigation hit the scene, the big sprinklers that go in circles, right? They started pulling water through wells, and now they started breaking out a whole bunch of sand sage. And so stuff around Garden City, for instance, we lost prairie chickens there. And then also a lot of oil and gas development, mostly in the 1970s and 1980s. So areas like south of Garden City, the biggest prairie chicken research project ever done in sand sage to date was done by 2 PhD students that over 6 years, they put transmitters on over 600 lesser prairie chicken hens. That was all done in the late 90s. And where they did their work, there hasn't been prairie chickens there for over a decade now. Like Kansas Wildlife Parks can't find any birds out there. In Colorado, then we had a massive hit. We had this deal, at least in some areas, where our birds were actually expanding out into CRP during the early 2000s. And we were actually seeing like exponential growth in Prowers County, for instance. But then we had this massive blizzard that put down 42 to 48 inches of snow on the level. It stuck around for 2.5 months. For over 2 months, we never got above freezing, and that hammered the heck out of our chickens. And we lost chickens in a lot of our areas. And then basically after that, we went through an 18-year period of time where 15 of the 18 years we were at D1 drought or worse during the primary nesting season. So it was not just a 1-2 punch for chickens. It was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, just kept getting it for several years. So much so that Colorado actually dropped down to, we could document in 2016, because of all these things, especially with this drought, 25 lesser prairie chicken males in the state of Colorado. That's all the way from Cheyenne County clear down to Baca County. So that's over like a 200-mile stretch or whatnot. So we were very much on the brink in Colorado. Just jumping back a little bit to the Dust Bowl, this map just kind of shows. So this is Colorado here, Kansas there. You can see the Oklahoma Panhandle and Texas down here, New Mexico. This is basically showing the different years of Dust Bowls. The dash or the lines there, you can see that's the Lesser Prairie-Chicken range where they still exist now. And basically that stuff that I talked about earlier, where it was listed back, that book I was mentioning, it's Bent's North American Gallinaceous Birds. It was written back in the 1940s. It's a really interesting book. Get your hands on it. But it talks about basically Stevens County and Morton County. So here's Baca County, Colorado. Stevens County and Morton County, or this is all Baca County rather here. Stevens County and Morton County was listed as the epicenter of lesser prairie chickens, thought to be like the core stuff. But you can see that the Dust Bowl pretty much centered right over the best stuff for lesser prairie chickens. So where are we now today? Like I said, 2016, we bottomed out at 25 males. In 2023, the lesser prairie chicken was listed as a threatened species for the second time. They were listed in 2014, but then a judge down in Texas made a ruling that vacated the listing decision. They were again listed again in spring of 2023. Don't know what the future brings here. Not long after the listing, or basically, so I guess it was a year later, summer of 2024, a bill was introduced to the House and the Senate. It would pass both the House and Senate to have the bird delisted, and the Biden administration vetoed the bill. So the bird almost was delisted. And I'll get just about 3 weeks ago, a senator in Kansas introduced a bill for the bird to be delisted. We'll see what happens with that, but I'll get into why that's so important here in a little bit. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we do very intensive surveys. This is Baca County down here, the Comanche grasslands down here. This is clear up to, here's I-70. We're actually up in greater prairie chicken country here too. So this is what I survey, and my crew, I have a small handful of folks that work for me, that we're out there surveying every morning. This is what we've surveyed over the last 5 years. So we're covering, a lot of our vast majority of our lesser prairie chicken country very thoroughly. Just last year alone, we surveyed 1,225 survey points. We found 89 males across 16 leks, of which 59 of those birds were in the sand sage ecoregion. The sand sage ecoregion as a whole, which again is going to be this country here, there were 200 males total. So, estimated population is probably going to be somewhere just under 500 birds. So when I talked about in 2016, when Colorado bottomed out at about 25 males, in the sand sage ecoregion, we probably went just under 200 total birds in the sand sage ecoregion. So very much on the brink. Now we're up to about 500, which is great, but that's a far cry from 80,000. And the reality is we are one massive, multi-year drought or a gnarly blizzard or something like that away from extirpation in the sand sage ecoregion as a whole. A place that just in the 1970s, 1980s was thought to be, had far more birds than any of the other ecoregions and was thought to be the best of the best for lesser prairie chickens. So in not that much time, here we are on the brink of almost losing them. So what about some of the current challenges that we are facing? So I'd mentioned CRP before. Again, that's farm ground that's been converted to grassland. And this is a big part of the lesser prairie chicken story. I'll pull up a map or a little bit more information on the shortgrass ecoregion. But that shortgrass ecoregion that's kind of in west central Kansas, it's called the shortgrass CRP ecoregion, but it's an area that actually, if you look at any of the historic range maps for both greater prairie chickens and lesser prairie chickens, they don't even show up in that area. Back in the 1980s, like, some landowners were seeing their very first prairie chicken showing up in those areas. They'd never seen them there before. Basically, what happened is you had an area up there of shortgrass country, like along south of counties like Gove County, Lane County, Logan County, along the Little Smoky, where you have a lot of shortgrass. Most of that was converted to farm ground. And then when they put a whole bunch of that back into CRP, you had a mix of shortgrass and CRP. And what was missing in that system was nesting habitat. As soon as CRP hit the scene, now you had that dependable nesting habitat. And one of the strengths of CRP historically has been that CRP doesn't get grazed. It's basically planted and then it's just left alone. And so you have nesting habitat that is there year after year after year after year. And that made so much of a change that, you went from a place that had virtually no prairie chickens in the 1980s to, by the late 90s, the highest densities of lesser prairie chickens in the world were found in the shortgrass ecoregion. So that's really cool. That gives a lot of hope that if you can create habitat, we know we can build habitat and the birds can respond. But right now, of the 35 or 32,000 birds estimated across the range, 25,000 of those birds are in the shortgrass CRP ecoregion, which are highly dependent on CRP. And even in Colorado, like I said, every single lek that we have in Colorado currently is in CRP. Unfortunately, our current farm bill, which just keeps getting kind of kicked along for another year and another year and another year. I think it was a 2018 farm bill. They made significant changes to the program where they kind of started taking a big shift from CRP being kind of a set aside grassland program, just more on a conservation value, to more a working lands type program where landowners can actually go and do managed grazing on that ground every other year. Additionally, emergency haying and grazing can occur where basically if there's a drought, landowners can go out there and they can hay the grass, they can graze it. Historically, that had to get approvals at the federal level, and we didn't have, emergency haying and grazing didn't happen very often. But now it can happen anytime you hit D2 drought in a calendar year. Problem is even in our wettest of years, we usually hit D2 drought sometime during that year because, we may have a really good wet year, but it all depends on the timing when that moisture comes. We're always going to be droughty at some point in time in the year. So we're starting to see fields look like this year after year after year. This picture on the left actually shows there's a lesser prairie chicken nest here. This is in Baca County. So this is marking a nest where a hen had successfully hatched out a nest. And this is what they're after. This is not what they're after. This is not what's going to cut it. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of these fields year after year looking like this. Additionally, a big shift to CRP is this new program called grassland CRP, where basically instead of going to farm ground, they go to rangeland, and landowners are paid basically not to plow out their rangeland for a 10-year contract. But they're not required to do anything different from grazing. So basically there's no uplift. There's no net benefit to wildlife because the landowners are just grazing as they always have. There's no incentive to graze differently. And the reality is most of that farm ground really isn't under jeopardy of being plowed out anyways. It's a short-term conservation easement. The landowner, if they want to get like wind energy out there, solar, something like that, they just have to leave the footprint out of wherever that wind tower is built. So the problem is that a lot of the focus and funding is going towards grassland CRP away from the traditional crop to grass. CRP for our, not just lesser prairie chickens, but most of your grassland bird species, anything that's depending on more like a mixed grass, mid-grass type species, CRP is the only thing that's been really keeping those birds around. And we're very quickly losing a lot of that CRP. So, and then also that last farm bill, they're paying the same rates they were, even less than they were 30 years ago. So that doesn't work. So we're seeing a lot of plow out of CRP that these chickens are depending on. And then very much in Colorado, one of the big challenges that we're facing is actually with energy development. So lesser prairie chickens are a bird of the Southern Great Plains, an area that historically didn't have much in the way of trees on the landscape. And these birds are smart, and they basically associated tall structures with predation and threats. You have a tree out there, there's going to be raptors nesting in it anywhere in the prairie, right? And so lesser prairie chicken hens especially show a strong aversion to tall structures. So when you start slapping a whole bunch of windmills out there on the landscape, lesser prairie chickens will completely just vacate the area. Greater prairie chickens have a little bit more tolerance to it than do lesser prairie chickens. But you know, in recent years, we've had some projects get developed right on top of prairie chicken leks, and the birds have left. But for the most part, most of our birds have been left alone. However, recently, you know, this last year, they've built the Excel Power Pathway, which is a massive, massive transmission line. It goes right through the core of our Colorado lesser prairie chicken country. Not all of it's built yet, but all the segments, you know, all segments but one are approved. You know, they're finishing up a lot of that construction this year. Not only is there the impact from the transmission line in itself, but it's opening up the door to now solar and wind through all this country. And the best wind that we have in some of the best wind we have in Colorado is right across lesser prairie chicken country. So there's, you know, about 14 different projects that are currently planned in lesser prairie chicken country. There's 16 last year. There's 16 active leks in Colorado. Currently, there's plans for wind towers to be built on 14 of the 16 active leks. So that could be the nail in the coffin for birds in Colorado for lesser chickens. So that's just pretty depressing, right? So I'm going to get into some of the challenges and what the heck we're doing and some of the things that we have done, what's worked, what hasn't, and all of that good stuff. So, you know, one of the questions that often we're asked is why don't you just bring more prairie chickens in? What about translocation? Or what about a captive rearing program like they're doing it for Atwaters? Well, man, if we get to this place where we have to do what they do for Atwaters, we're in a really, really bad place. And we're nowhere near that yet. But the reality is anytime you doing captive rearing, depends on the species, but prairie chickens, just like any other upland game bird, if they're raised in captivity and you release them, the vast majority of them are killed within the first couple of weeks. These are animals that are dependent on a mother to teach them, and they don't just come out of the eggshell knowing how to avoid predators and getting eaten. And you see that with Atwaters when they're released, you know, the vast majority of them get killed right away. We would expect the exact same thing with lesser prairie chickens. So what you try to do is everything you can with your wild birds. So what about translocating wild birds? So in 2014, 15, or I guess when I became a biologist back in like 2011, I'd been a wildlife officer before that. When I became a biologist, one of the first things that I did with my new boss is I went to him and I said, our birds are in really bad trouble in Colorado. We really need to start pursuing a translocation project. And especially looking at the Comanche National grasslands, I think that a lot of the management's actually pretty good down there. And we have some really good core habitat that's protected from a lot of things. We ought to consider this. Well, it took a lot of years to kind of convince people, but we finally got to the place of we embarked on this project to take birds from the shortgrass CRP ecoregion in Kansas and move them down into the sand sage ecoregion in the Cimarron grasslands in Kansas, and then the Comanche grasslands in Colorado. Sorry, this map is not the best, but here's the Kansas-Colorado border. Here's basically the corner of each state. Here's the Comanche grasslands and the Cimarron grasslands. So basically, this is what we did. We had two release sites where we brought these birds. So before going into this whole project, we had to kind of look first at everything that was done by those that came before us. Very little work had been done trying to move prairie chickens in the past, but most of it that had been done by Colorado Parks and Wildlife or Colorado Division of Wildlife or whatever we were called at the time. But most of those projects were very, very small. And it's easy to catch lesser prairie chicken males. It's extremely difficult to catch lesser prairie chicken females. Again, they only show up on a lek for a morning or two or three. So most projects, they just moved a handful of males and no females. Some of that was done for like concerns over genetic diversity or whatnot. But the biggest project that had been done to date was actually moving birds out to the Pueblo test track there just east of Pueblo. There's some sand sage habitat out there. There's some good grasslands or whatnot. So a project was done in the 80s and early 90s where they moved a reasonable number of prairie chickens. The reality is they didn't move enough prairie chickens to make the project work. But they more birds than had ever been moved in the past. Some of those birds came from the Comanche grasslands, but most of them came from Garden City area in Kansas. So you're talking about 200 miles away. Well, when we were looking at doing this translocation project, one of the things that we were looking at was like, are they going to stick around? You know, well, we had one bird that was caught by Garden City that was moved to the Pueblo test track site, and all those birds were banded. 1 year later, a prairie chicken hunter hunting just like a couple miles away from where the bird was trapped, shot this, because you used to legally be able to hunt lesser prairie chickens in Kansas, shot a prairie chicken, had a band on it. It was one of those birds, so it had returned 200 miles back to where it had been captured. So going into a translocation project where basically that lek is the center of their universe, that definitely like highlights a challenge that we might face. For all we know, we may release them and they all return back to where we captured. On the project on the Pueblo test track site, they had only one single hen that they documented that actually nested. All the other birds disappeared. The technology wasn't as good. They had transmitters on them, but the technology wasn't as good. I also don't think that they used airplanes to track them. As we learned on our project, you had to have airplanes to track the birds because they would move so much. But basically, we went into this not really knowing much. And so one of the biggest things to learn from this project was to learn, is this a viable tool in the toolbox? Would translocation work? And so when we started this project, we partnered with Kansas State University, bringing in some graduate students. So it's a project between Kansas State University, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and Kansas Wildlife and Parks. Where we got the birds from, again, is in this shortgrass CRP ecoregion, the area I was talking about that was really dependent on CRP. Again, most of this area back up in even through the 80s, nobody even knew that there was lesser prairie chickens up here. And then the bulk of our entire population exists up there now. So we moved birds from country up there that was, most of it looked like the picture of the CRP that I showed. Very different than the sand sage habitat where we're going to release these birds. We're trying to bring the birds back to this area here, down the sand sage habitat on the Cimarron and the Comanche. All right, I don't know what, I'll let you, because run the computer. We're going to watch a short video if we can pull it up, because it's going to do a better job of showing you what we did during this project and how we trapped them and all that, instead of hearing me talk about it.
Where'd it go?
To the top right one? No, that's the slide.
There we go. Now I gotta share the screen.
Thank you. Lesser Prairie-Chicken translocation project, where we're trying to trap lesser prairie chickens so that we can bring them down to southeastern Colorado onto the Comanche National Grasslands and southwestern Kansas onto the Cimarron National Grasslands. So we're trying to recover the population of those species. Just 3 years ago, we were looking at probably less than 50 lesser prairie chickens in the state of Colorado. So the situation for the lesser prairie chicken in our state has become rather dire, and hence this project. We've been trapping prairie chickens now for 3 years. We started in the fall of 2016. We're trapping prairie chickens on leks. Leks are the breeding grounds for lesser prairie chickens. Several grouse species have lekking behavior where they all get together on breeding grounds. The males display. The lek is really a fun thing to watch, all that lekking behavior. The birds are fighting, they're booming and chasing each other around. Lesser prairie chickens make some really crazy sounds. If you ever have the opportunity to watch lesser prairie chickens, I really highly recommend it. I'm kind of biased here, but I think that they're the most interesting of the grouse species and most enjoyable to watch on the lek. So every morning we're trapping these leks. We use 2 different techniques to try to trap these lesser prairie chickens. We have walk-in funnel traps that are 3 foot
foot long by 2 foot tall wire traps. But we don't bait them, they just have a wire funnel that goes into the trap, just kind of like a minnow trap or a fish trap. Another way that we trap lesser prairie chickens is we use drop nets. Looks kind of like a circus tent out there on the prairie when we're trapping. And you set that right over the main part of the lek where the dominant males are, hoping to catch the females as they're coming in. Most of the folks that are trapping are in blinds. And so they'll jump out of the blind and you race to the net as fast as you can. You work that bird out and you put it in the pillowcase. And then once we catch those birds and we have them in hand, we load them up in our trucks and put the air conditioning on. We want to keep those birds cool. It seems to reduce their stress. We head to the cabin at Scott Lake and we take a series of measurements on them. We weigh them. We measure some measurements on their heads and their legs, on their wings. Basically, we're looking at some morphometric data. We also, on quite a few birds that we've taken, we've drawn blood, we've taken mouth swab samples. We want to do some disease testing. We want to make sure that the birds that we're moving into Colorado and down to the Elkhart area in Kansas, that they're healthy and that we're not transporting any diseases into another grouse population or affecting any other wildlife. So while processing the birds, we put a transmitter on every single bird. We want to be able to track their movements and see where they go. Especially for the hens, we want to be able to determine if they're successful at nesting and see where they nest. That's going to help us because we'll be able to learn more about the habitat that they're selecting for nesting, so we can make sure that we can put more habitat and work to get more habitat like that on the ground. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is committed to try to recover and restore endangered and threatened species in the state. So we're doing this project to try to recover one of Colorado's most, I think, iconic grouse species. It's a species that is very much native to Southeast Colorado. It's a part of Southeast Colorado's history and a favorite animal for a lot of people.
If you listen carefully, you can hear a hybrid. That weird, like it's a hybrid greater lesser prairie-chicken. You wouldn't mind helping to switch back over.
Something.
I'm just afraid of cutting everybody else up in Zoom land.
You got your deodorant on?
So when we were trapping these birds, it was a long, grueling, each season was, month and a half, 2 months. We're waking up at 2 in the morning every morning, heading an hour and a half out to trap. We'd, get our trap sites all set, pull gates off of traps, set up the net or whatnot, capture birds, bring them back, process them. Then we'd have to drive them down to a vet in Garden City and then release them that same day and then drive back. So it was kind of 16, 18, 20 hour days, day after day after day. So my hat's off to the crews that worked with me and everything that we did out there. We accomplished a lot. So here's what we ended up capturing over. We started in the fall of 2016. What we're trying to do is actually catch a few males to put them out on the Comanche and the Cimarron. In 2016, when we, Colorado kind of bottomed out, we were down to 1 lek with 2 males in all of Baca County. So on the Comanche grasslands, 1 single lek. In all of the Cimarron grasslands, in Stevens and Morton's County, there was 1 lek with 5 males on it. So we were very much on the brink of those places. We tried to bring some males in that fall to kind of bolster those leks to set us up better the next spring. That worked in Kansas. That didn't work in Colorado because I think we lost our birds in Colorado in summer of 2016. But over the course of the project, we were able to translocate 411 birds. And the big thing that I'm really, we were pretty proud of is 207 females. That's quite a feat because it's just very, very difficult to catch those females. So we had graduate students involved. We had, we wanted to learn everything we could about this. Not only whether translocation is viable or not, but also like vegetation selection and nesting and this, that, and the other. We collected a ton of data. Not only would we have 3 graduate students involved in the project, like day to day on stuff, but we had, I think there's been like 3 or 4 other graduate projects that have come out of the data that we've produced. So a lot was learned. This real quick, whoops. So just, I wanted to show you, highlight kind of what these birds did. So this is the Oklahoma-Colorado border, Oklahoma-Kansas border. This faint line right here is the Kansas-Colorado border. So here's the Cimarron grasslands, here's the Comanche grasslands. Up here, well, clear up here is where, yeah, I guess the Arkansas River. So just wanted to give you a sense of what these birds did. Each individual color is a different bird. If we can get it to go here, should work this time. So when we release these birds, they usually would spend 2 or 3, 4 days kind of acclimating to the transmitter in the area, and then they would just take off. Pretty common for them to travel several hundred kilometers before finally settling down. And the vast majority of the birds ended up basically after about a 3 to 4 week flyabout, they would come back to either where they were released or to a lek that they found somewhere during the course of their travels. We had a lot of birds released in Kansas that came, 50 miles over to the Colorado site and nested. And we had birds from the Colorado site that came over. We had birds up here in Colorado. Well, like here, we had multiple birds nesting up here that were from both sites. That was like 50, 55 miles away from those release sites. That's not normal behavior for lesser prairie chickens. Usually they stay relatively close to that lek. Most of them spending most of their life within about 5 miles. Some of them may travel 15, 20 miles in the winter to find a better food source, but they don't travel that much. But right here, those hens, this is all hens, and they're settling down. They're in nesting mode right here. So if you see any birds moving from here on, what's happening is a nest was lost, and they'll have this freak out period where all of a sudden the nest gets lost, and then you'll see one of them shoot across the screen. Here's just an example of three birds. Again, here's the Oklahoma border. Here's the Kansas-Colorado border. This bird released in Colorado. At one point in time, I had a GPS transmitter on a bighorn sheep that was a half a mile away from this lesser prairie chicken that had a GPS transmitter on it. This bird made it all the way almost to the Arkansas River and back. We had several birds that made it up to the Arkansas River. We never found any north of that. That is a ridiculously long distance for those birds to travel. This bird made it down into Texas and then ended up coming back and nesting up there. Yes. They travel like that because they were translocated, because, yeah, I think it seemed like they basically were just like mapping out everything around. And then they would always return to where they found the best habitat, which were, these leks that were getting established with the males that we were releasing. So the professor that was involved on the project, he was anticipating we would see no nesting whatsoever. I was a lot more optimistic than that. But it turned out actually nesting was really good. We had, depending on the year, 75 to 90% apparent nest initiation, meaning that 3 out of 4 up to 9 out of 10 hens, if you released them, they were actually putting a nest down that year. Basically what happened is that for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they would have this freak out period, and then they all finally settled down and put down nests. We had really good nest success, really good hatching survival, but what we didn't have was really good brood survival. And I don't know what that's about. It seems to me maybe prairie chickens are not as good of mothers as maybe some other species, or, I don't know. But at 35 days of age, we go in and we try to flush those chicks and see what we have for survival. So we saw some really positive things on the nesting side of things. One thing to really note is, again, we were catching birds from habitat that looked like this in Kansas, and we're dumping them out in sand sage habitat. We're trying to get them reestablished on the Comanche and the Cimarron. Well, what did those birds do? They all returned. The vast majority of them returned to habitat like that. They went and found CRP grasslands to the north of the Comanche and the Cimarron and plunked down nests there. Here's kind of a map that kind of illustrates that. All the blue dots, that's historic Lesser Prairie-Chicken leks. So we used to have a ton of leks. There was a long history of chickens being down there from the late 1950s. They were getting reestablished on the grasslands there. Well, we released them here, and we released them here, and where the birds ended up was mostly up in CRP country to the north. They wouldn't stay in the sand sage habitat. Seems to me more than likely that's a natal habitat preference. That they were just seeking out habitat that looked like the habitat that they grew up in. It's unfortunate because there's just not enough birds in sand sage habitat to catch sand sage birds and release them in the sand sage. So that is something that was really important that we learned from this project, that it may be pretty tough to get those birds reestablished, specifically in our sand sage habitat. So what did we learn from that? What all happened? Well, the last releases we did were in spring of 2019. In the spring of 2020, we had, so it was 1 year from the last release we counted 215 males across 20 leks. 20 leks all established because of this project. So we had a population, around, 450 birds probably out there. So basically we removed 400 birds and we got a population established about half that size. I was ecstatic. We were all ecstatic. This far exceeded our expectations on the project. Unfortunately, after, let me, mention, of all the males that we saw in 2020, the majority of those were birds that were raised there. They weren't birds that we moved there. They were raised by birds that we had moved there. So that was all second generation birds, and survival rate should even go higher, for second generation birds. So things were looking really good. But then for 3 years, we had a really nasty drought that centered over for 2 of the 3 years. The driest spot in all of Colorado was here in southeast Baca County, and the driest spot in all of Kansas was in southwest Morton County. So the population really kind of tanked, and we still have leks and birds in Colorado and Kansas as a result of this project. But the reality is you need to have a minimum sustainable population, move a lot of birds to get a lot of birds there on the landscape. So did this work? Yes, it worked. It did some amazing things, but was it enough? No, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to get the birds back on the Comanche grasslands. There's habitat issues there. There's a lot of things going on. So is it something we'll try again in the future? I don't know. What are some of the other things we're doing currently? Well, one thing is a big shift in where we're focusing our attention. So we basically, all the work we've done in the past has been scattered all across the landscape at a whole bunch of different leks. And we've been, spreading out all of our resources, and we just can't shift the needle enough doing that. And so we really are focusing most of our efforts in an area here that we're calling the Sand Sagebrush Generational Grassland Stronghold, Kansas, Colorado. So this is Prowers County, eastern Prowers County right here. And this area of sand sage, all the yellow dots on there, that's active Lesser Prairie-Chicken leks. There's one ranch in here that's 32,000 acres that has 40% of the birds in the sand sage ecoregion exist on this ranch. And that ranch has an easement on it. So it's kind of a foundational property. So we're trying to build off of that property and try to build some core grasslands that are protected in perpetuity in here. So that's one big shift that we've taken. And so much of my time is spent focused in this area. And as painful as it is, ignoring a lot of the other areas where we have lesser prairie chickens. Lesser prairie chickens almost exist exclusively on private lands. Yes, a little bit on the Comanche, Cimarron type stuff, but for the most part, it's a private land species. And so it all starts with landowners. And so, we have a long history of building relationships with landowners, taking landowners to leks, just talking about their operations and all that kind of stuff. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy a couple of years ago started on basically a survey process. We're trying to survey as many landowners as we can. And through that survey, we're trying to not only plant seeds and let those landowners know about programs and things that are available, but we need to know what the fair market value is. If you're a farmer, are you interested in any of your farm ground going to grass? And for how long would you let it be in grass? And what is it going to cost to do that? If you're a rancher, would you be willing to set a portion of your ground aside every year or every few years to not be grazed, where we can dependably have some nesting habitat? And if so, what's that going to cost? So what we're doing is we're developing basically a database of landowners and projects that when we find funding, we can match that then with those landowners. And so kind of a reverse auction situation that we're setting up. Also, if we can show that there's a lot of interest in available projects and we have shovel-ready projects, it's a lot easier to seek out funding. One of the things that Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Nature Conservancy is really focusing on now is we've gathered up some money to be able to pay some landowners to defer grazing, where for, might be 3 years or 5 years, they're not going to have cattle on portions of their ranch, so that in drought years, you're going to have basically as best a nesting habitat as possible. It's not like cattle are not necessarily, they're not the problem per se, but in a drought year, it's tough for everything. And a landowner during a drought year can't afford to take their cattle off, and there's not enough grass to go around for the cattle and the prairie chicken. But where we really need to be focusing right now is this: fee title acquisition, conservation easements, long-term perpetual projects. And never before has there really been a lot of movement this direction, but we're starting to get a lot more movement this way. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, our Wildlife Commission, our leadership, they're definitely stepping forward saying we want to make lesser prairie chickens a priority now, and we want to try to get land purchased so that we can control management, protect it for birds in the future. Something that I work a ton on is grasslands restoration. We do a lot of crop to grass work. I have 2 full-time employees that work for Pheasants Forever that do nothing but putting grass in all winter, all fall long for lesser prairie chickens. Anywhere, any opportunity they can through any program, we're trying to put more prairie chicken habitat out there. Now, to me, and I know we're coming close to the end, so we'll wrap this up here shortly. But to me, the biggest silver lining that we have is actually with the destruction of habitat through all the wind energy stuff that's going in. Because the lesser prairie chicken is listed, if a wind development company goes and they put up a wind tower, they legally are obligated that they have to mitigate for any impacts. And the way that it works is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has identified for a transmission line or a wind tower or solar field what that impact radius is. So in this case, for instance, you have a wind tower here. Well, basically 1,800 meters from that wind tower, any piece of prairie chicken habitat out there has to be mitigated, and mitigated at a 1-to-2 ratio. So for every 1 acre that's impacted, you basically have to have 1 acre that's preserved and 1 acre that's in restoration. So the preservation is where you have something that already is prairie chicken habitat. Now you're going to put a conservation easement on it, and that conservation easement requires that the habitat is managed for prairie chicken. So in most cases, that is uplift. So you're taking sand sage rangeland that's maybe heavily overgrazed, and now you're going to reduce the stocking rates on it, and that's in perpetuity for forever. And then this is what really gets me excited is the restoration. For us in Colorado, that means crop to grass restoration. So talking about a huge amount of acres going from cropland to grass. So with the mitigation bankers that I'm working with, we're currently looking at about 50,000 acres of this kind of work in the sand sage ecoregion on the Colorado side. So if all this works out, I'm hoping by the end of my career that we may have 150, 200, 250,000 acres of land that is not only protected, but is managed specifically for prairie chickens. That is the type of thing that would really shift the needle and make the difference and give us a core population that we can build off of in the future. What concerns me, though, is this is all dependent on the bird being listed. And a year ago, a bill went before the House and the Senate, approved both by the House and the Senate for the bird to be delisted. The Biden administration vetoed that bill. Just 3 weeks ago, a senator in Kansas put forward a bill, introduced a bill to have the bird delisted. The thing that's really concerning about this one is the language in the bill actually says that the bird cannot be protected under the Endangered Species Act again. So it's not like we would get a new administration or new percentage of Democrats and Republicans or whatnot, and here the bird gets listed again, and then we're back on from mitigation. No, it means the bird could not be listed under the Endangered Species Act. All other species would be protected, but not the lesser prairie chicken. now the thing that gives me a little bit of hope in this is talking to an attorney with the Nature Conservancy is they're claiming that basically this is going to take a 2/3 majority to go through. And that's what I don't understand is why it would be 2/3 instead of 50-50 in this case. But with that being the case, I don't think there's any way that's going to pass. So we'll see what this all brings. The mitigation bankers that I'm working with, that we're working with landowners, they have really cool projects that are going, they're starting to get cold feet. And so we'll see where this all shakes out. Additionally, all the wind energy development, everything we're seeing, the transmission lines are coming down, but now you're losing, a lot of the federal dollars and support tax credits for this projects. But on the other hand, Colorado is shooting for all green by 2040. So the crystal ball is very, very fuzzy on all that's going on here, and potentially years worth of work may be just totally lost and a lot of gains lost. Or a couple years from now, we could be looking at some really amazing stuff that's really changing the game. With that, I'll offer it up for any questions that you guys have. Yes, sir.
I really want to raise the temperature of the room and the area. Why not just get the damn cattle off my grassland, get the damn cattle off our national, you see what I'm getting at?
Sure.
Cattle problem. Prairie-Chicken, get them out there, fight grass.
Sure. On the federal land, yeah, sure. On the federal land, I scratched my head a little bit on that too, in that the reason for the livestock on the grasslands is not a multi-use thing. It's for management of the grasslands so that the grass can be its best, so that the wildlife habitat can be its best. For some species, that's true, and the way that it's grazed, and I will say, like on the grasslands, historically they've done a really good job of managing it relative to a lot of the other landscape. But is it enough for prairie chickens? Well, I think history shows in that we had a whole bunch of prairie chickens there and we've lost them through time on the Comanche grasslands, that it probably wasn't enough, and there needs to be more conservative measures or grazing deferment incorporated into those systems or something like that. But there's a lot of voices and a lot of people, that on that, right? So I mean,
It's my grassland, it's your grassland.
yeah. At some level, I mean, at some level, you still are going to need to have some grazing there. Like these systems do need that kind of disturbance, but not like most everybody says, like, oh, annual. Well, that was not historically what occurred with bison, more than likely, right? So, and even then, the bison would be problematic because the way the bison were, they'd move through and blitz everything off, but they had a huge landscape and huge numbers, so that those systems wouldn't work. It, probably to mimic that, you'd have to have a lot of deferment, where a lot of the grasslands would not be grazed most years, and some areas are, and then you're shifting those cattle around. But it'd be a very different management than there is now. With the listing, the U.S. Forest Service is supposed to be managing for prairie chickens specifically. How that's all going to shake out or whatnot, I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of people's livelihoods, and it's a tough situation for sure. But I think I can tell you that I mean, for most Comanche grassland staff, they hear, because they work with the ranchers all the time. That's the voice they hear. They don't hear the voice from many other people. So maybe it wouldn't be bad for them to hear from other constituents, I guess.
Helpful to maintain the classification if we were to reach out to our representatives to ask not yes.
Well, I mean, right now you have several of the other states are suing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the listing. Colorado is not. Colorado is a very, at this time in history, is a very different situation. But even within Colorado, like one of the biggest things that we're looking at is the green energy stuff. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be pushing that and trying to do that, right? But nothing's perfect and nothing is without consequences, right? And I have a wildlife bias, right? Like that's my life and my focus, and I see the impacts there. And the reality is, for most wildlife species, we don't even begin to know or understand what the impacts are. From lesser prairie chickens, we sure know that a lot of this stuff is going to be bad. But you know, there's been so much momentum and so many people standing on like green. It's a tough one. So the more awareness, and that's why it's, you know, good for me to talk to you guys tonight, you know, like the more awareness that it's not so black and white as you know, renewable energies are good, you know, are great. There's a lot of negative impacts there. You know, if you research it, there's any number of things you can look at that are problematic there. So nothing is simple, right? And there is no perfect answer, right? So, but I will say, if they're put in the wrong place, they can be really bad to a species that's on the brink of disappearing.
Would you please repeat the questions that are asked in the audience for us to hear online?
Yeah, you bet. I'm sorry that.
Thank you.
Melanie, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Amazing. I'm going to do you one better and pass the mic around.
Okay, thank you.
You can hold it. I don't trust myself. Oh, can you hear me? Okay, cool. I don't even know. I always have questions. I actually wanted to switch gears a little bit. I have no idea what the main predator is for the prairie chicken. I assume it would be like
Everything eats
maybe
chickens. I mean, everything likes chicken,
foxes.
right? Like, I mean, I've eaten chickens and, you know, prairie chickens. At least when we've had transmitters on the birds, as far as adults, what we would see is heavy predation by raptors, particularly in the spring and in the fall when you have raptor migration. Especially if the weather kind of short-stopped birds and the birds were, we'd have just huge numbers of raptors. We would have transmitted birds just dying right and left from raptors. Great horned owls are a big, you know, a big predator. But coyotes, about basically half of our predation was mammalian, with the coyote being number one there, and half the predation was raptors. For chicks, everything will eat a chick when they're small, and eggs, everything there too. I mean, my youngest daughter, she just did for science fair a project is quail eggs instead of prairie chicken eggs, which is in the sand sage. In our chicken country, she put little artificial quail nests out with quail eggs in them and a game camera on them to see who the greatest nest predators were of quail eggs. What do you guys think would be the greatest predators for quail nests? Snakes. That was her hypothesis, is that bull snakes would be the number one. Coyotes, skunks, raccoons, ravens. You know what it was? It was cotton rats were number one, and number two were wood rats. It was actually the vast majority of those nests were taken out by those critters, which I wouldn't have guessed. So she set up basically nests in bobwhite and scaled quail habitat where both species nest. So it was kind of basically surrogate nests, or you know, basically dummy nests where we could learn about predators on bobwhite quail and scaled quail nests.
There's a good question online. Considering the species is vulnerable, is there the possibility of at least removing them from the hunt end?
Okay, so the question online is asking about, you know, what about hunting of lesser prairie chickens? Well, since a year or two before the birds were listed in 2014, the only state that still allowed lesser prairie chicken hunting, Kansas, they stopped it. There was relatively little harvest of prairie chickens. I mean, a population of, you know, 25,000-30,000 birds, they were having annual harvest about 200 birds. The reality is like Kansas absolutely had the population to withstand that kind of harvest, whereas in Colorado we haven't for a really long time. And so since, you know, the early 1900s, it's been illegal to harvest any lesser prairie chickens in Colorado. Greater prairie chickens are still hunted in Colorado and much across the range. Well, in Colorado, greater prairie chickens have expanded their range significantly. We're at a higher, like we have higher abundance of greater prairie chickens, or at least distribution, than was seen even like when European settlers were first showing up. So it just depends on the situation. But there's, you know, for greater prairie chickens, there's so little harvest relative to the number of birds, it's really a non-issue. But right now, a mad rancher that goes out to a prairie chicken lek and illegally shoots some prairie chickens would have some major consequences there. Yeah, lesser prairie chickens very much have been protected from hunting.
Sorry, another follow-up question on that. So why the heck are greater prairie chickens doing so well? Like what do they have that lesser prairie chickens don't? Is it just like a habitat difference, or is it a size difference, or?
So that's a really, really good question. One that, we don't have all the answers for, but a significantly greater proportion of the lesser prairie chicken's range or habitat has been impacted. More of it, proportionally, it's been converted to farm ground. In Texas, a lot of it that was grasslands has, brush encroachment, mostly like mesquite, for instance, taking over a lot of lesser chicken country. There's been a lot more oil and gas development in the southern Great Plains, and there's been in the northern Great Plains. There's just a lot more in the way of intact grasslands further north. It's just lesser prairie chickens are better adapted than greater prairie chickens for the southern Great Plains. The southern Great Plains is an area with greater stochasticity as far as more frequent droughts and a lot of changes in climate. And so it's just a tough go. If you don't have big enough blocks of grasslands where those birds just can't withstand all of that variation. It's interesting, even like with lesser prairie chickens, for instance. Lesser prairie chickens on the northern part of their range, where moisture is more consistent in the spring, like in the shortgrass ecoregion, those hens actually live shorter lives, but they will, almost all of them are nesting that first year. Like they don't give up on nesting. Down in Texas, where drought is a lot more common, those birds will live longer and they'll choose not to nest in certain years where it's droughty. So they have different life history, like they're taking different strategies based on that, right? So moisture is much more consistent and dependable further north. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing is just simply those lasting big impacts to the habitat in the southern Great Plains.
What's your understanding in the overlap range between the two species of how any hybridization could function in threats for lesser prairie chickens?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So in that shortgrass CRP ecoregion, an area that, as I mentioned before, back in the 70s, nobody knew of any lesser prairie chickens or greater prairie chickens. Both species simultaneously moved into those areas. But lesser prairie chickens are better adapted to those areas, and so they've been dominating. So, in fact, when I first started going up there and working in Kansas on some of that stuff, it was maybe 80% lesser prairie chickens, 20% greater prairie chickens. And in more modern or the last few years, it's like 98% lesser chickens, 2% greater chickens. So with droughts and all that kind of stuff, the lesser prairie chickens have been doing better, outperforming the greater prairie chickens. In Colorado, though, we have in Cheyenne County in our CRP country, we finally got 3 wet years, 2-3 wet years where we actually saw birds moving from Kansas into our CRP country in northern Cheyenne County. And also then from that area and from the north, we had greater prairie chickens moving in. So all of our leks that we have in Cheyenne County currently, you go out to them and they are mixed leks, lessers and graders both. Because there's so few birds out there, even though they're not the same species, like you're close enough to what my mom looked like, I'm gonna, hang out with you. And we see actually a really high rate of hybridization there. So nothing really concerning further east, but in like Cheyenne County, like it's pretty common that you'll have 2 lessers, 3 graders, and 1 or 2 hybrids. So yeah, in trying, as far as the lesser chicken conservation concerns, the hybridization issue is an issue. Not so much so that it's a tough deal. Like, should we go out there and start shooting the males on the lek? Well, you're never going to be able to get rid of the greater chicken females that are out there that are breeding them with the lesser chicken. So you can't totally address that issue. It's a naturally occurring thing. Where do you draw the line there? I don't know. That's a hard one.
I have a question. You mentioned a few different projects and a few different partnerships. How is all of this funded?
So, right now, the greatest, again, Lesser prairie chickens in Colorado are very dependent on the farm bill. It's on federal dollars for CRP to exist. There are some wonderful potential projects with CRP, for instance, like something that we are working on is a program called CREP, where if the state of Colorado can come up with a big pot of money that basically matches 50-50, what the feds can do, we can actually have our own sort of state-run CRP program that where we could actually make the program much better, where it's, grazing is not an issue, it's getting the right mixes. Instead of landowners getting paid less than they were 30 years ago, they can actually get paid fair market value. So we can, can get a lot of folks in the door putting in new grasslands. At the end of the day, the farm bill and farm bill dollars, that's the greatest source of money that there is. Even with IRA, Inflation Reduction Act money, we've had a whole bunch of grass or crop to grass conversion that we've done through the Natural Resource Conservation Services EQIP program. So that's the biggest funding source, though that all has to change. This stuff is, like it's looking right now, there's a good chance of the farm bill, we may not have another farm bill. Like so much stuff is changing. The signs have been there for a long time that we've got to not depend on CRP at all. We've got to come up with some of our own things. Fee title acquisition, we've got organizations like Southern Plains Land Trust. They're very interested in pursuing projects. In fact, next week, you've got one of their big donors that I'm taking out into elect. We're trying to convince him to purchase a ranch in Kansas that's going to help be a big core block habitat. We've got other partners like the Nature Conservancy, Pheasants Forever, Colorado Parks and Wildlife through our habitat stamp dollars. There's a lot more support and interest in spending dollars for prairie chickens there. We've, in paying landowners to not graze portions of their ground, we have Species Conservation Trust Fund dollars, which basically that's an excise tax on oil and gas drilling here in Colorado. Currently, so there's Senate Bill 230 was passed this last year that it looks like it might actually, that basically is another one that brings in taxes on oil and gas production for wildlife habitat work, for species conservation work. And it'd be to the tune of I think you're saying like 19 to 20, maybe even $30 million a year. With that, that money, for instance, like I put in a request for $52 million over the course of 15 years. To put that in perspective, I think all of Colorado Parks and Wildlife budgets, a little over $200 million. So that's not a small thing that and I'm not getting laughed at when I'm putting in a request for $52 million for this. So it's changing all the time. And what seems like sometimes really good funding sources go away. And we find others on the horizon, and the landscape is ever changing. And so we are trying to grab money wherever we can, in any way we can. So if any of you have any very wealthy friends that would like to help out in the prairie chicken world, I'd be happy to bring them onto elect for a day and help them fall in love with lesser prairie chickens.
On that note, if we want to go see a lesser prairie chicken, where should we go?
Okay, so yeah, really good question. And I saved the last couple slides for, I don't know why. Well, I guess it isn't really, I have the information here. I don't know if it froze up or whatever. Anyways, so unfortunately, as the lesser prairie chickens haven't been doing well, pretty much all the public viewing opportunities have gone away on the Comanche grasslands and the Cimarron grasslands both. When I first moved down there were public viewing blinds. Didn't cost you a dime. You just had to reserve in advance. But this is what we're seeing. We're seeing stuff like in Oklahoma, Lesser Prairie Chicken Festival is being discontinued, or has been. Most every viewing opportunity out there has been discontinued. Additionally, now that the bird is listed as a federal species or federally listed as threatened, you can't just go out there on your own legally and set up on elect to view them. You actually have to, I have to be permitted to go out there and survey them. I take folks out onto lesser prairie chicken leks, but I'll get 250 requests a year from people that want me to take them out. And I have to draw the line somewhere because I'm also trying to find prairie chickens elsewhere. And I can't keep going to the same lek, taking out tours every day. So that's pretty well limited to people that are involved in chicken conservation in some way, shape, or form. But the one place that I believe still is active this year, they're permitted to do so, but basically Oakley, Kansas, this is up in the shortgrass CRP ecoregion in Gove County. They are doing basically prairie chicken viewing tours that are on some of the ranches that we actually were capturing some birds for our translocation project, like the Haney Ranch and some other places. So this is what you're going to want to check into. And I'd imagine they're probably fully booked for this year. I would call and investigate about next year. Hopefully we can.
Kansas Parks and Wildlife do two lakes, so two places. One's Nature Conservancy, and this one. I took a group down there 3 years ago. It was highly successful. Yeah, and I also can go back to 2006, where you had a lake east of Cameo, and I don't know if you remember it. The hive was below ground. So when you looked at them, you were at ground level. It was a fabulous lake. Unfortunately, those birds died out within, I think, 2 years. The numbers got less and less.
Yeah.
Not sure why they died out. Do you know why?
Where was that lek?
East of Cameo.
Oh, of Campo, by Campo?
Campo, sorry.
Yeah, so the public viewing lek there on the Comanche was, so that was the 0607 blizzard. Knocked most of those birds back. There were only like 2 males on that lek then that next spring, and then they blinked out after that. The 2011 through 2013 drought we had down there, like in southeast Colorado, was drier. In those 3 years, is drier than any time during the Dust Bowl. It was record-setting drought. We had like no rain for about 3 years and no prairie chicken production. So we had that massive blizzard and then record-setting drought on top of that, and that's what took out the birds on the Comanche grasslands there. And yeah, the viewing blind is still there. It's just really sad every time you go by it because there hasn't been. That lek was active for like 42 years or something. Yeah, really, really sad. And the same thing, they had a real similar blind there on the Cimarron grasslands there in Kansas. I'm hoping that in 10 years, for my retirement, I'll be running prairie chicken tours in places where we brought the prairie chicken back, but we're a long ways away from that. So, but like I said, there is some hope. So we'll see. Yeah, but definitely jot this number down and take a picture or whatnot. So.
What is the name of that bill that would declassify them as endangered? So we could contact our legislators to oppose?
I would say just Google it.
Okay.
Kansas Senator Lesser Prairie-Chicken bill or something like that.
Okay.
You should
Thank
probably
you.
bring it up. Like I said,
Okay.
He introduced the bill maybe 3 weeks ago. I'd imagine it should be pretty easy to find. I don't know what the bill number, what its name is. Any other questions? All right.
Anybody online, do you want to unmute yourself? We can't quite see the chat anymore. If you have a question. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your interest in the bird.
That was really, really good.
Devin is going to pull some raffle tickets for that bird seed. Y'all online probably don't care about this. We're going to wrap up and stop the recording. Thank y'all online for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
George,
you
I
bet.
used to work for the National Park Service,
Oh, okay.
and then the USGS is a aquatic research college.
Gotcha.
Um,
Where were you mostly, where were you focusing most of your work?